much, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, before I go to my next question, I just want to ask a few questions as to the loss control officer. How long has she been in the position? If Transnet is saying that since the loss control officer has arrived at Transnet and they created the position, there's an improvement, how long has she been there? And did I hear correctly when Louis said that he chairs the audit committee? How long has he been at Transnet, and how many of the members of the current audit committee at Transnet have been at Transnet for over 5 years? Because Transnet had an irregular expenditure of 6.3 billion from the previous financial year. It's well and good we are hearing what you are putting in place and what has happened throughout the previous years. And the minister is also highlighting that even audit firms were not disclosing fully. Yes, but just for a matter of interest sake, the current audit committee, how long has that committee been in place in terms of the number of years that the personnel has been at Transnet? Thank you, Chair.
Chairperson, if I could answer the honourable member. I am the chair of the audit committee since May of 2020. But since this board were put into office in 2018, I was indeed a member of the audit committee. The audit committee further consists of Ms. Gratitude Rampaka, who is on the call today, who chairs the risk committee, Ms. Mpho Letlape, who chairs the finance and investment committee, as well as another board member, Alawani Ramabulana. He also has been on the audit committee since this board came into office. I would just like to add, so not 5 years, honourable member, but I think since middle of 2018. I think in terms of the context of the number, I think what is important is that with our engagement with auditors, it forced us to revert back to activities that already started in 2011 and 2012. So again, I would refer to some of the commentary in our pack, as well as that of the Auditor General, that I think those that fall under our control at the moment on current transactions, and you will see a reference made to the number of 2020, I think it is a substantially lower number. But honourable member, let me immediately say any number of irregular expenditure is unacceptable. So whether a lower number, we are not where we need to be, but we are being burdened as we clean the past. And unfortunately, honourable member, we are dealing with more than 13,000 contracts. And it was only in October of 2020 where we saw that, albeit we have been in discussions on issues of supplier development, the problem is a lot deeper than that. And that was helped by getting the Auditor General coming on board as the official auditor of Transnet in the current financial year. That audit change and their focus assisted the Audit Committee, board and management to get to a deeper understanding of how big this problem really is. Silendile, you might wish to just comment on you joining and the time you've been on board.
Thanks, Louis. So I've joined Transnet from the 1st of November 2020, basically roughly been in the position for just over 3 months. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Why did management not ensure that daily and monthly reconciliation for irregular expenditure are processed? What is the current status on the irregular expenditure? Are the reconciliations now done? Thank you, Chair.
Nonkululeko and Spindile, can you come up to provide details? Honourable Member, your question is in some ways complex and also quite simple, in the sense that it is managerial responsibility to ensure that there's proper record keeping. But one of the big projects that we have in Transnet right now is to digitize as much as possible of the processes and systems. You'll find that in virtually all of the reports that would come from the AG and even from the previous auditors, the real challenge is that sometimes it's difficult to find document and just document management inside the organization. And so that drives to a large extent a large part of the change that we are focused on. And Nonkululeko, as the Group Chief Financial Officer, is running a process where we're doing a complete review of the finance function in Transnet. And we're quite ways down the line with the review of procurement in Transnet, both ensuring a much simplified procurement process and procedures, which align fundamentally with clause 217 of the Constitution and not much else, and ensures that it is then compliant with all of the BBBE requirements. But Nonkululeko, and I think between you and Slindile, you should be able to answer what you're finding, and the rest, honourable members, will be speculating for why management didn't in the past, but we can talk about what we are doing now to ensure that all of the CFOs in the various ODs are keeping copious and accurate records of the process. But the digitization side of this exercise is absolutely crucial. And in fact, the lack of this digitization is tied pretty much to what we found was a bit of an odd IT strategy, where there was way too much outsourcing of the IT function. And now we're also in the process of rebuilding that and pulling some of that responsibility directly back to Transnet. We're not trying to kill a hybrid model. We would still want to have a hybrid model, but we want to make sure that in as far as systems and data, we have a direct control of that inside Transnet. Nonkululeko, I leave the rest to you.
Thank you, Chairperson. And Chairperson, maybe to start, indeed, digitization will assist us greatly in ensuring that if we do come across any irregular expenditure, as I indicated, that most of our contracts are fairly long-term, in that we could have a contract that spans over 5 years. And therefore, for us, the critical thing is that if we do come across an irregular contract that relates to the past, we touch it once and we report it. And when you look at the audit report itself, the one issue that is being raised is the fact that our reporting was not complete to identify all irregular expenditure. And that's why the digitization will assist us to flag any contract that may have been found to be irregular, but also for us to complete the process, as we would be led by the loss control officer, in ensuring that we go through the determination test as required and can complete the process of condonation properly. In the second instance, Chair, as the audit committee chair was indicating, we are looking at this irregular expenditure in two parts. One is to ensure that all the new contracts are as clean as possible in relation to the irregular expenditure, so that we don't have a lot to report going forward. But also for the existing contracts that we have in place, we are identifying and we have this project set up at divisional level. So each of the divisions has got a team that is identifying these irregular contracts. That report is consolidated and dealt with at the exco of the division, but it then gets consolidated as well at Transnet Group, and on a monthly basis, Transnet Exco, chaired by the Group Chief Executive, gets a report that indicates how much of the irregular expenditure has been identified, what have we done to deal with consequence management. It may well be an awareness training requirement or any more harsher requirements that are driven. And the human capital team, driven by the Chief of People, is also assisting us in ensuring that we are speedy in dealing with the consequence management within the same project. The report from the Exco of Transnet then gets sent to the Audit Committee for oversight to give them feedback on what we are doing with the issues that have been identified. And therefore, Chair, we are working on improving, and I think there's significant improvement already in ensuring that the reporting and reconciliations are happening at the cost center level and then consolidated to the various higher levels. But as the chairperson of Audit indicated, we have to focus on ensuring that we have dealt with the 13,000 contracts that may come from the past, and that is where we see a significant amount of work required from us. Thank you, Chairperson.
What are the timeframes to complete this digitization system that you are implementing?
I almost want to hold my head because honorable member, I don't want to lie. That's a hard job. So one of the first things that we have to do is setting up the shared services. Now we're quite way down the line in terms of the design of the shared services, but obviously because it has a direct impact on the bargaining unit employees, we are still in process of talking to the unions to ensure that we move the appropriate people into this function. There's obviously a worry about the loss of employment, but we are quite far. We should be recruiting, we should be closing on the recruitment of the head of the shared services, because that's one dimension of that. The other issue around just ensuring that we have the appropriate apps. Transnet a few years ago decided to use SAP as the fundamental operating system throughout the organization. So one of the things that we're doing is ensuring also that we update all of our applications, because surprisingly, it's all of it is way out of date. So I wish I could, make you feel comfortable that it's a quick process. It isn't. It's a process in play, and I'm hopeful that by the time we come to the beginning of the following year, at the very least, we will be starting with what we would be able to digitize is what we are working on from now going forward. But then we still need to have a process to ensure that there's a digitization of the history as well. Nonkululeko, I don't know if you have to add, but I also have the CFOs, the CEOs on the call. So if anyone else wants to add to that, honorable member.
Portia, if I could just build on that from the Audit Committee perspective, honorable member, I think it's just important to also highlight that the Transnet of the past had a fully outsourced IT function. And it was only with the support of our Chief Legal Officer at Kutsia that the contract with Jajima, who is now our service provider, were completed in 2020. So I think a lot of these aspirations that we have obviously coincides with a total changeover of a supplier, and that brings challenges as well. But we will surely make sure that at the next engagement with yourself, that we are able to commit on timelines, and we will add it to the remedial program. Nonko, over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson. If I may add, on the shared services, the design work is largely done, and I think we are now moving towards implementation. And we, as the GCE was indicating, we are working on recruiting the head of that function. And it will then assist us, because the one critical thing on many of these elements is to ensure standardization across the business as well, to ensure that we do not pick up an issue in one division and we resolve it there, but another division continues to experience a similar issue. So having a shared services center will help in many ways to ensure that issues are picked up once in the organization, and the rest of the organization does learn from the other parts of the business. And therefore, Chair, with the design work done, we do believe that within the financial year that we are starting, we will progress quite significantly in setting up the shared services center, and the systems processes are as well on the go. And again, it will be an improvement that we will make sure that at least we have the base in place, and we continue to learn from best practice to ensure that we've got a shared services that will assist the organization greatly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Patse. I hear what you are saying. I asked you the timeframes of the digitization because I wanted to clearly understand whether you are what you are saying to us. And the one official says that you might not have the timeframes. You, on the other hand, are saying to us that in the near future, in the near soon year to come. So we will see, but it does not quite give me the sense that you are fully saying that you are now keeping records, but let us proceed. The independent auditors reported that they could not obtain evidence that disciplinary actions were taken against officials who incurred irregular expenditure, as required by Section 51(1)(e)(3) of the PFMA. Why are these records not kept by the entity, especially evidence that would be related to disciplinary actions at Transnet?
Chair, through you, Chairperson, the records are kept in the thing. We have a system that we call KURA. I don't remember what the acronym stands for. And the purpose of that system is to record these instances. But as the point that I think happened earlier happened because we didn't have dedicated capacity in the space of irregular expenditure by way of a loss control. We had a PFMA compliance, but those functions were tended to be mixed with other functions. So we now had dedicated PFMA compliance things. So the system was there, but was incomplete. So part of what we're dealing with now, since we started this dedicated effort since around October, November, to deal with all of the PFMA compliance related issues, is we're populating that system, we're making sure that it's fully compliant, and we're doing data cleansing, and we're both able to take out information that was irrelevant as well as add information that was not there. So the system is there, it's called the CURA. We are managing it under the supervision of the loss control officer, and from the HR function chair, we are proceeding to then make sure that we follow the path on a regular basis with weekly meetings where we follow the path of each of the cases to determine the consequence management cases that are there. And I think, as I think both the minister and the group chief executive said, some of the irregularity pertain to cases where people had followed organizational processes or policies that turned out not to be in compliance. So there was no intention to not follow process. They followed process as they understood it at the time. But there are cases where we have people that are obviously guilty of something more. So your fruitless issues and of course criminal conduct. The numbers are big, but the bulk of the numbers are accounted for by the SD issues. So the volume, if you look at the irregular expenditures, you're going to find that the bulk of it, a very big amount of it, is accounted for by fairly few cases in the case of it. But yeah, in a nutshell, Chair, that's the answer that I wanted to provide. I don't know if Portia or Nonkululeko want to add. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairperson. what we request to do, Chairperson, is just to give a sense of the numbers in relation to consequence management. And again, I think the audit finding itself talks to the fact that we have systems that are not talking to each other. Yes, we have CURA that is meant to report on our irregular expenditure. But what we've also done, Chairperson, in the recent processes that we've set up is that we are tracking the irregular expenditure numbers, but also the process of dealing with the consequence management. And I will ask the Loss Control Officer, Slindile, to just give the committee a sense of the numbers and the progress we've made in dealing with the consequence management, Chairperson.
Thanks, Chairperson. Highlighting in terms of the numbers that we've done so far, in terms of ensuring that consequences are done, we've allocated per OD operational division. And we see that currently we're sitting, as at February, we're sitting with 1,127 cases that have been dealt with in relation to the prior years. And also for the current year, we've already started, and there's about 228 transgressions, consequence management that have been highlighted. And on each of these, it's also ensuring that we do provide required support in terms of training that is required. We do conduct consistent training, and we also do every Thursday, we have knowledge sharing sessions in part of the PFMA improvement plan, where also the CFOs of operating divisions as well as the CPOs are part of the team, and they attend on a weekly basis. We also have identified that of the matters that we have dealt with, obviously I will break it down in terms of what is irregular expenditure and what is fruitless. The bulk based on the number in relation to the number of irregular expenditure. For the financial year 18-19, Chair, I want to highlight that we've already completed 706 cases in relation to that particular year. And for the last year's irregular expenditures, and fruitless and wasteful, we've already completed 314, Chair. I will pause there for any questions that may follow. Thank you.
Could Scopa be please provided with that list that you were tabling now, so that we can see it and follow up on it? The list you just given to us, can it please be provided to Scopa so that we can see it and do follow-ups on that? My following questions to you is, looking at the irregular expenditure that amounts to 56.2 billion was mostly as a result of contravening SMC policies and incorrect application of the triple PFA. Are the officials in SME unit provided with adequate training on the prescripts of the PFMA, treasury regulations, triple PFA, and SMC policies, SCM policies? Thank you.
Honorable Chair, you know, this we have got a process that the Group Chief Executive alluded to at the beginning of the conversation.
Sorry, Vule, can, honorable members, this is Vule Namakole, who's our Chief Procurement Officer. He'll answer those questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Group Chief Executive. From the point of view of the work that we are doing, that the Chief Executive alluded to earlier on in her conversation when she was opening up, there is a project that we are currently running, and we are concluding that project, which is a reform of the procurement process across Transnet. And part of that, process is touching on people, is touching on processes, is touching on the systems as well. And part of what we are doing at the moment is the retraining of people in terms of the understanding of the PFMA, understanding of the triple PFA, and the impact in terms of the Section 217 of the Constitution that it has in terms of our processes. And over and above that, Chair, we are reviewing all our policies and procedures to ensure that we are complying with what we need to comply with, and make sure that they are simple, and they are simplified across the whole organization. And the training is not only going to be focusing on supply chain management personnel. We are obviously going to extend that beyond that to the end users, because we need our end users to understand specifically what they need to comply with when they come to us to look for a procurement service that we need to render to them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay. Everything we are doing is new, is being modernized, is being added on. We pray and hope that it will yield the results, and that we are not going to just implement system after new system, modernizing it, adding on to it, and getting the skilled people. Yes, but we shall give it the time so that we see improvement in the next audit, whether our systems are going to assist us as good as you put them on paper and in English. My next question to the team is the SMEC unit, contract management unit, fully capacitated? What is the vacancy rate that you currently have? And why is the entity experiencing challenges in this area? As the SCM unit, what is your vacancy rate currently?
Thank you very much, Chair, for the question. In terms of the whole supply chain management unit, we do have vacancies, to the tune of around about 15 to 20%. And the reason why we do have vacancies is from the point of view that when the new management and the new executive came on board, we made a conscious decision that we are going to review the whole processes of procurement across the organization. Once we have finished the review, we will obviously get to the process where we have a clear operating model in terms of the roles and responsibilities of each and every person within the organization, because when we came on board, the roles and responsibilities were not necessarily clear. And that's why there was quite a lot of confusion. And then we've gone through the process to understand, the roles that we need to have in place. And then over and above that, what we have done as as leadership of the organization, we have identified the skills that we need for us to be able to move with the organization. And what happened is that, during the past, few years, the role of procurement remained stagnant, whereas the demand of our business was changing. So from that point of view, now we are trying to align the demand of our business in terms of the certain skills that we need in supply chain. And we need to make sure that at least we get the relevant people in the respective environments. Like what I've said earlier on, part of what we are going to do once we have completed the process, we are going to retrain the people and make sure that at least we have got people that are capacitated to be able to do what they are supposed to do. In the area where we are not able to get people that we can retrain within the organization, it's our intent, Chair, that we are going to look for these skills outside the organization to ensure that at least we bring in new skills, and that will basically blend with the skills within the organization to ensure that at least we are not disturbing the business continuity in terms of service delivery. Thank you.
Honourable Member, if I also may just add on that issue, the contract management. I mean, it's a fair point that you indicate, is that there's actually a lot of changes which are administrative. Some are not spurious changes. Some arise from the fact that when we reviewed audit findings, when we were briefed by the board as an incoming executive, these key areas of weaknesses were indicated. And so invariably, a lot more effort goes towards sometimes strengthening, sometimes putting in absolutely new processes. One of the issues that Vule is having to deal with in procurement is also the way that in terms of modernizing the skills that we have. To a large extent, most of our procurement people have often been administrative process watchers, as opposed to being a lot more skilled in terms of being commodity or category managers, as you would find in other large organizations. So one dimensionality of the training is just around understanding properly what it is that we buy. Now, we're not too worried about that by virtue of the fact that inside Transnet, both in TFR in particular, as well as Transnet Engineering, we have a very strong contingent of engineers, design engineers, who know exactly the specifications that we have and the capacity that's resident in South Africa. So what we've been trying to do is to bring that team together with the procurement team so that the two could work together to create what we understand is a supplier basis in South Africa, so that on the one hand, we are able to meet some of these requirements around local content. And as far as issues around transformation, we've been spending a lot of time talking to the DTIC as well as National Treasury to ensure that there's increased standardization around what it is that we set as a benchmark for transformation, so that as an SOE, we don't run ahead of government, we follow government processes. I'd also like our Chief Legal Officer, Sandra Kutsia, to talk a little bit more around how we're approaching contract management as you raise this issue, because it's an area of definite weakness that we have at the two levels, both at the legality of the contract, the complexity of the contract that we have, and then in terms of monitoring when the contract comes to an end. And this is a truism across the operation, not just only in procurement, even in revenue generating contracts. We've not been very good in making sure that we follow up before the contract comes to an end to actually start deciding if we're going to go out on a tender. And in part, by the way, this is what's driven some of the irregularity, is that we've not been procuring fast enough. It's one of the reasons why in restructuring Transnet, we took the procurement function out of finance and we put it in with the chief strategy and planning, so that it can be included where it rightfully belongs, is that in the early stages when you're still planning for any procurement, for any investment, for any project, is that procurement is part and parcel so that they're able to go out into the market on a faster basis. But I'd like the Chief Legal Officer to just talk a little bit more around some of the reviews that we've been doing in terms of in the area of contract management so that we get better on that. I'm afraid, honorable members, I'm going to come back to this issue of digitization that we were raising, is that digitization helps us to take away humans having to remember that a contract is coming to an end. And I think as Nonkululeko and Snindile have indicated, we have a massive number of contracts in Transnet. You'll never be able to remember if you're going to base that on humans remembering. So using systems to automate the process of renewals, tender must come out, is absolutely crucial to our operations going forward. Sandra, if you can, please.
Thank you, Portia. Good morning, honourable members and Chairperson. In addition to what Portia had highlighted with regard to the digitalisation of the contract management function, the approach that we're taking is an integrated approach, whereby the business owners of the individual contracts, be that a procurement contract, be that a revenue generating contract, is familiarised with the terms and conditions in a way that they conduct themselves to limit contingent liabilities and other liabilities to Transnet. So we are creating a platform whereby key milestones of those contracts are monitored on a regular basis, so as to ensure that the necessary planning, be that from a procurement or from an expenditure point of view, is in place in advance. In that way, we also then ensure that we limit the number of variation applications that we have to put to National Treasury or through our governance structures. What we're trying to achieve is that we stay within the budget and expenditure anticipated, that we keep contractors to their obligations, that we pay in accordance with our obligations, and that we do not create new contractual liabilities without the necessary approvals. It is very much a training and awareness building exercise, but it is also a matter of recognizing the internal controls that should go with each and every contract, even if it's a revenue generating contract. Thank you, Chairperson.
The 15-20% vacancy rates that you are stating, can we also please be provided with a list of that 15%, 20% in numbers of the vacancy rates? And what I would like to know is that the SCM employees and executives, have they been vetted? And what is the current status on vetting at Transnet?
Thank you very much, Chair. In terms of the SCM professionals, the levels, A to C, they have been vetted. There's a process that was managed across the whole organization. And at the moment, we are going through the process where we are vetting the rest of the organization, taking into consideration, grade level D up to the bottom level within the organization. This is really going to be part of the process that we are going to utilize in terms of ensuring that the people that are cleared within the process, then there will be the people that we are going to put in positions. And where we find that there are certain people that are found wanting, we'll obviously manage them through the normal process within the organization that is dealing with the issues regarding declaration or issues regarding the conflict of interest. So on that aspect, we are in the position that at the moment we are basically going to extend the vetting beyond the levels of senior executives, which is really in line with the process that we are running at the moment in terms of the whole reform of the procurement process. Thank you.
Although the amount of fruitless and wasteful expenditure decreased from the previous year, this expenditure should have been avoided. You have said that you are taking steps against responsible officials, but my question is, are there any plans in place to recover the money from those officials? What is the plan in place to recover the money from officials?
Thank you, Chairperson. Oh, Portia, go ahead.
Well, I was going to, thanks, Nonkululeko. I mean, I think I want to go back to the vetting question, honorable members. As the minister indicated and the chair, we were lodging this morning, so our chief of security is a bit busy. So he had to go and make sure that we deliver all of the documents on time. So the issue of vetting and lifestyle audits, it's one area that gratefully we were able to reach a quick agreement with the unions, UNTU and SATAO at Transnet, that we could vet every single person from bargaining unit to management level who works in the procurement function. We have a couple of files that are with the SSA, which are waiting for vetting. However, they have indicated to us that we could establish capacity to do vetting because they just don't have enough capacity to be able to run through all of our people. So it's a priority area that we'd be looking at, and pretty much in line with what Vule was saying. Not only are we doing lifestyle and vetting of all of these members, but we are also making sure that we provide the appropriate training for them. On the next question, there's Eric Neethling, who's on the call as well. And Eric is leading our investigations. So he can indicate where we're at with some of our investigations. And I think between Nonkululeko and Sandra, we can come back because there is definite effort to make sure that to the extent that we're able to claw back our monies, we are determined that we will claw back whatever we can. Thank you, Chair. So maybe Nonkululeko, if Eric can come in and then you can follow up with Sandra.
Hi, good morning, honourable members, Chair. I would like to just give some feedback also regarding the status of the lifestyle audits. Of the 450 regional members, levels A to C that went through the lifestyle audits, 130 have some material findings of varying degrees against them, which are being addressed accordingly. The process for lifestyle audits for members levels D to F has commenced from a procurement perspective. There are approximately 5,600 affected employees that will have to go through this process, and we'll be following a phased process, but also a risk-based process in terms of ordering and prioritizing of individuals for the lifestyle audits as per their positions and access to public finance. From an investigative perspective, some of the slides have reference to cases where we're working very closely with the SIU specifically, especially the Transnet working group, and there's significant progress being made there at this time. From an investigative perspective, one of the core functionalities or activities that we have undertaken was cleaning up the case inventory. There was a lot of duplication and the likes, and the team has been centralized and are working accordingly in that space. And the cases are flowing through into the consequence management space as well. I hope that answers your questions. Thank you.
Once again, the independent auditors reported lack of evidence on disciplinary steps taken against official responsible for incurrence of fruitless and wasteful expenditure. Why is there slow progress by senior management in enforcing compliance with legislation? I'm raising this because, yes, Transnet is giving us responses. You are telling us about systems, but ultimately at the end of the day, where was management when irregular expenditure happened? Because the PFMA states that irregular expenditure must not be incurred at all. I will repeat that it must not be incurred at all. So in all this, why is there slow progress in enforcing compliance with legislation? Good and well, your presentation has stated to us all the systems you are putting in place, but the pace is rather slow, according to responses you are giving. But if all of us go back to the Bible that governs us, in terms of how we should spend government's money, it clearly states that there should be no regular expenditure incurred at all. So why is the progress so slow?
Honourable members, I'll ask between Kaya and Gema, who's our Chief of People, and Slindile to indicate what progress we've made thus far. I would beg to argue that actually, I don't think that the progress is slow. We may be saying what the digitization is about the belts and braces, about ensuring that in the future, this is dealt with going forward. In the meantime, and Slindile will indicate the cases that we've been dealing with and whittling through. At the end of the day, we have a responsibility also to be just and fair, and with the investigations and with the individuals concerned. And as we indicate, in certain instances, it's not an irregularity that arises because somebody was willfully trying to break the law. As we indicate, sometimes it's our processes, so they may comply with the internal Transnet process, but not be in compliance with the PFMA. or the triple PFA, or in certain instances, as has been the case, is with the CIDB. And that's why the cleaning up is essential, so that our internal processes are completely aligned with regulations, so that if you're complying with the Transnet processes, you would be 100% compliant with all of the regulations. So I'd really argue, honorable members, that real progress is being made. And in certain instances, you see that there's a repetition of, it's the same kind of offense, which is linked to the same contract. So it looks like it's increasing. And I think this is one of the statements that the minister was indicating, is that if there was a way to ring fence systemic, so for example, competitive supplier development infringements are going to be with us for as long as the contract is alive. When the contract closes, or when we've been able to approach Treasury and get condonation for that, it grows as the size of irregular expenditure. So what we can be able to indicate to you is where we're at in the immediate in terms of dealing with it and ensuring that going forward it is limited. Now, ideally, we would like to never have irregular expenditure. But let's bear in mind that irregular expenditure, unlike fruitless and wasteful expenditure, is something that sometimes happens not because you are willfully trying to break the rules or the law. Sometimes it's the process, it's the moment that generates the pressure to move in a particular direction. So, for example, in terms of the DOA, the delegation of authority, it was too centralized that it actually made Transnet so slow. And remember, at the end of the day, we have to run trains on time. We have to make sure that the ports are operating. So what we've been trying to do, and we're quite far down the line in terms of reviewing the operating model, and I think as Wule was trying to say, to ensure that there's a deeper delegation of authority out of the center towards the operating divisions. And in the operating divisions, we've given some fairly clear guidance that we also want to see delegation of authority a little bit further down towards the points of operations in depots, at the ports themselves, and at the various corridors for TFR, so that there's a greater flexible speed on our operations. And then what we're ensuring is that our procurement policies and processes enable these individuals to comply with the policies and then to procure. So it is a complicated process, but I'd really like honorable members for Slindile to just repeat how far we have come in terms of dealing with consequence management, because absolutely agreed. Some of the consequences are not so much about, there's some people, frankly, who it's wrongful, and we're dealing with them in terms of final letters of warnings, going through disciplinary process. But there's a good number of people where it's a matter of ensuring that there's appropriate training and ensuring that there's appropriate delegations of authority, so that the actions that they undertake are in line with the approved levels of authority. So Slindile and Kaya, I'd really appreciate, Kaya, you coming in with the report on how far we are with the consequence management, the list that we had at the beginning and where we are at today. Thank you.
Portia, just before Kaya and Slindile comment, I think, honourable member, it is of course embarrassing if we cannot put forward a Transnet that all South Africans can be proud of. So we will not leave any stone unturned. But I must say, the new management team, and bear in mind that our GCE is in the office for 13 months now, and the CFO only joined in July of last year. And I think if we speak about slow progress, and absolutely, given the size of Transnet, I personally would have liked, from an audit committee perspective, if we could have progressed faster. But I think our current management team, I think with the exception of 2 individuals, are all new with less than 12 months of service. And new eyes and a new view of things assisted us to get to the bottom of it. I think this management team, in terms of what they have achieved, I think it's phenomenal. But I do think the momentum will only pick up, because one need a period of time as a new executive.
No, wait. I don't think we want to venture down that space. We are not here calling into question the credentials or the capability of the management. And yeah, I think that the issues you raised are not pertinent to the issues. The question of pace remains of utmost importance and encouraging. So we can discuss those, or we can then get the members to come in.
Noted, thanks.
Chair, can I proceed? How many minutes do I have left, Chair?
Let's give you another 15, and then you can, and then we'll. I know that it's bulky. I'm just also wanting to make sure members get time as well, and still have another section to go. So maybe let's see how far you can in the next 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I have questions around the performance of Transnet. What factors contributed to the entity's underperformance? Does Transnet have adequate skills and workforce for its operations? What is the current vacancy rate in total at Transnet?
Honourable members, can I ask Dr. Andrew Shaw to come in with regard to Transnet performance in the last financial year, and Nonkululeko, if you can please come in as well, and we will talk to the vacancy rate in Transnet as the last step. I'll ask Thangema to talk a bit on that. Nonkululeko, maybe you should go ahead because I'm not sure where Andrew is.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, if I can just comment on our performance for the financial year ended 2020, which is the first few slides I shared, which highlight that, yes, over the past few years, much as we've seen subdued economic conditions across the globe and more so in the country, Transnet has continued to be able to generate quite significant revenue, the 75 billion we spoke about earlier. But Chair, Dr. Andrew Shaw will comment as well on the volumes, because what we have seen is that much as we've been able to continue moving volumes, they have not been to the levels that we would want to achieve. And for a number of reasons that I'll leave to Dr. Shaw to also comment on. We have seen volumes and coming through, but we believe that we could do much more. But we do see that the economic conditions have impacted what the performance has been. The second point that I would like to raise, Chairperson, around the performance of specifically around the volumes, is that if we look at, and again, we see the impact of COVID coming stronger in the results that we are not sharing today, because the period to 31st March 2020 was just before we were experiencing the COVID impact. What we do see, though, in the first 3 months of the financial year we are in, is that we see quite a significant dip, specifically in the first quarter, as the country was in the full lockdown, and we were not necessarily required to move as much, for instance, petroleum. but also from the general freight, we were focusing on only the essential kind of goods and services that we needed to work with. And if you look at the mining sector and other areas, they would have been only allowed to operate at much lower levels. But we do see that impact only in the new financial year. For the financial year that we are reporting to the committee today, in the 2020 financial year, we see much flatter volumes than growth, which is what we would have wanted to see. Dr. Andrew Shaw, I don't know if you're online already.
Hi, Nonkululeko, I'm not sure, but honorable members, if I may continue on this one, and I think maybe also as a reminder, in the last financial year, 1920, there were a lot of vacant positions and acting positions, and it's not an excuse, it's a fact of life, is that if you have that level of uncertainty, the ability of the operations to proceed is quite, to move with direction is quite limited. The next, I had just started at Transnet when the financials were being closed and rail and TFR volumes were being getting to a point where they were calibrating to where the end of the year happens, and we were able to close at, I think, I was just trying to confirm the number at 212 million tons.
Sorry, Chair.
Per annum.
Chair.
Sorry, yes, Chair.
Chairperson.
Yes, Honorable Swartz.
Chair, I think I must just rephrase my question because we will be running all over, Chair, so that I just be specific, because I can see that I am not getting the answer to the current vacancy rate, because under this year under review, the entity only received 28 or 38% key performance indicators out of a total of 74, which are contained in the 2020 shareholders contract. This overall performance is significantly below the DPES threshold and the prior year's performance. So my question was direct that, does Transnet have adequate skills and workforce for this operations? And the question they should equally answer is, what is the current vacancy rate? So I am interjecting, Chair, because I see that the response is all over rather than the direct question that I have asked. Thank you, Chair.
All right, can we get a direct response?
Kayangema, can you indicate vacancy?
Chair. So roughly our vacancy rate, roughly, Chair, is around 3% overall. I think to the question of adequate capacity, so one of the things that the group CFO would have indicated is that we are looking at that matter, the workforce planning in line with the zero-based budgeting process that the CFO have spoken to make sure that we are adequate to the task. So we do know that there's some lags, there's some gaps in some operational areas in some of the operating divisions, but there's also some upskilling in the administrative areas. I think we spoke about procurement, we spoke about a few things. So we're looking at the different segments of the workforce, and we're dealing with the answer of capacity on a segment by segment or on a corridor by corridor in relation to the different operations. We can answer the question more fully along the lines, but we think in large measure, I think we've got the numbers, but we might have to do some upsizing in terms of the skills. So we don't think necessarily the vacancy rate itself is the issue, but we think it's the skills mix, especially the balance between operational skills and administrative that is there, which is why at the heart of the current restructuring process, Chair, we are more recalibrating the distribution of skills and executives between your administrative type functions, your head office functions, and the operation functions. And we're basing the bulk of our skills at the ops levels themselves, because that's where you make a difference to volumes, to operations, and that's where you need to do the operational integration between ports and rails and all of that. So in the new structure, you might not see it in the numbers, but you'll see it in how the new roles have been recalibrated. In the new structure, we have put the bulk of our skills in the executive skills in the ports, in the yards, in the terminals, and we are redistributing the bulk of the administration that's in the head office to support those particular functions side by side with the work that the CFO has referred to by way of shared service center. So the bulk of it is about recalibration, Chair, as such, but we do meet the key vacancies where those are an issue. And we do have areas that we are not used to as a company, that we're not strong in, such as doing transactions, such as certain types of logistics integrations. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, if I may, I do want to come back on this point, because my objective is not to obfuscate and not to answer the questions that are asked. But I mean, in the end, it's the reality of the situation. It's not, there are more than enough competent and properly skilled people in Transnet. And I don't ever want to create an impression that it's a weak organization that doesn't have skills. It has fantastic skills. If you plan wrong and your assumptions are wrong, remember too that we're coming from an economy that was growing at 0.4%. There's no way that a Transnet can defy the trend of what's happening in the economy. So those are very real issues. Next very real issue that will affect performance is if you're not able to procure rail to ensure that you do the maintenance on time, you can't run trains on time. So one of the things that we have is that there were speed restrictions to the extent that the usual slot numbers that we have were not available. The issue of being able to buy rails, I promise you, took us almost a year. It was towards the end of last year that we got exemption, because that area of rails is designated for 100% procurement in South Africa. Now, it is impossible to procure a thing that's not made in South Africa. And it takes a lot of time of toing froing between various government departments to get approval to go ahead. The issue of the 1064 locos has been a matter pending for a long time. That means that we didn't have all of the locomotives that we had available. So with due respect to the members, and it is, yes, it's a management and a leadership issue if we do not forecast the right numbers in terms of what we're expecting to see as performance. But in terms of there being skills in Transnet, I would hate to walk away from this presentation, Honorable Member, with an impression being created that Transnet doesn't have some of the best that we have in South Africa. Have they been misled? Absolutely, another different story altogether. So capacity and skills we have. The issues that we raise about reorganization of operational people towards the operations themselves, delayering the organizations, absolutely essential to ensure that going forward, we are able to meet the performance. And let's also be honest, to have 74 performance indicators, it's nearly impossible to meet that. The question that I asked when I was looking at that is that when you look at the 74, how many of those 74 indicators are directly related to the issue that I started off with, Chair, where I was indicating our shareholder value, the value that we have to the South African economy. And I would hazard a guess that in a lot of areas around social economic transformation, around all of those developmental indicators, we've actually done really well. It was in the areas that relate to crane moves per hours, where we have not made sufficient investment in plant and equipment. And yes, it's an issue that we have to change and we have to address. So I'm sorry, Chair, if I come back in an impassioned fashion, but I really feel it's important that we must defend our people when it is an unfair attack. We have skills and we have competencies. The issue of vacancies as well. Kayangema is indicating what was at the time. We're going to come back and we'll give full disclosure in terms of where we stand, because one of the things that we are having to do, that every single OD is having to do, zero-based budgeting means that we must go to the very last person that we have working for us, ensure that they actually have a role, and then come back with the new OD structure. At that point, we will be able to indicate if we have any vacancies whatsoever and what the size of those vacancies would look like. Thank you very much, Chair.
Kunzima Sihlalo asiyona union thina kaScope. My following question is, which divisions mainly underperformed, and what steps are being taken to improve performance?
Honourable members, could I ask the CEO of TFR, because TFR is our biggest operation in terms of sheer size of people, but also in terms of revenue. I'd ask the CEO, Susan Zimela, to just talk about some of the things that they've been doing on their side to improve in performance. And then maybe at the end of her answer, if Nonkululeko can just indicate what we're starting to see at the holding, at the group level. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, GCE, and good morning to the honourable members and honourable chairperson. So in terms of, the initiatives that we are undertaking to improve performance within the TFR space, I think a lot of it has already been touched on, but indirectly. The first is that, we have actually organized our teams now along the various corridors in order to make sure that there is better alignment between the rail operation and the ports operation. And we've placed our senior executives at the ports so that that alignment and improvement is achieved as quickly as possible. In addition to that, we've been working very hard to make sure that we give them the ability to be able to speed up execution in all of the corridors, because that really has been the main challenge in terms of how do we actually improve the speed of execution along each of our corridors. And we have been working, as already indicated as part of the feedback earlier, in ensuring that they are provided with the necessary DOAs to do what is actually necessary within the corridors. Specifically, we've been working very hard to improve the delivery of the rail network infrastructure. The GCE has already indicated that we had several challenges in the last few months in relation to bringing in the critical material that is required to improve the infrastructure, but a lot of that is now in place. So we have done significant work on most of the corridors to ensure that we have a more efficient running of our trains on each of the corridors. There are still one or two where we are experiencing challenges, currently, but we are hoping that in the next 3 to 4 months, all of the work that needs to be done on the infrastructure side will have been completed largely. In addition to that, we do continue to face challenges around security issues and theft on our lines. On there, we've had to look at a completely different way of trying to manage the security issues that we're experiencing. Unfortunately, it will take us a good 3 years to try and implement some of the forward-looking solutions relating to security. And here, what I'm talking about is the acknowledgement from our side that we will do what we can right now to replace the cable theft that is at an extremely high level as quickly as possible, but that in the longer term, we have to find a different way of making sure that we are replacing a cable which is less theft prone, because we believe that this is a challenge that will still be with us for years to come. There are other items that equally we're looking to see if we can utilize more technology as opposed to the traditional ways of guarding our infrastructure to ensure that in the next 2 to 3 years, there's less dependency on traditional ways of monitoring the security concerns in our space. So we have been focusing on, as I said, just the key things which have been problematic in our system. The last area where we continue to be actually challenged is around the availability of locomotives, but I think that later when, or hopefully when our head of legal speaks to some of the ways and the initiatives that have been undertaken to try and help us resolve the issues on the locomotives, then we'll talk to how we intend, to find solutions for going forward. Having said that, in the meantime, we have been working on finding, solutions. In the short term, together with our colleagues at Transnet Engineering, just to improve the maintenance and the efficiency of the locomotives that we need in order to improve the volume delivery on each of our corridors. Ultimately, we do not have a problem in terms of the amount of demand that is actually on the table, but it's really about how we improve the efficiencies within our own system in order to be able to take advantage of that demand. We have acknowledged that we would require some help in various parts of the business, which is why we've also been working very hard with some of our partners to try and move some of the goods off the road onto rail. And in this last year, we've made significant improvements in making headway of moving some of the commodities off road. I think just for the Natal corridor, specifically in this last year, we've been able to move in the region of 45,000 truckloads off the road and onto rail. So there are a number of initiatives that are currently underway. But for me, significant in everything that we've done so far is ensuring that we're placing very key senior executive as close as possible to the ground to understand what the issues are and to be able to respond very quickly to any of the challenges that we face. Thank you.
Thank you, Caesar. Chairperson, just to comment per the GCE's request, I think when one looks as well at the shareholder compact and the list of items, I think to the honorable member's question that was saying, what is being done to improve? And I would like to just pick on two that are listed in our financial statements on page 24, where one of the items that we had committed to deliver on was a property strategy that would be finalized and approved. And Chairperson, to the point that was made earlier that Transnet has had to put together the EXCO team and specifically in the property space, we have Mr. Patlamuhlaka, who joined as probably in October, September, but I can confirm that as we stand today, Chairperson, that property strategy has been approved by the board, has been incorporated into our corporate plan for the 2022, and he is then driving the implementation of the strategy itself. And therefore, we are expecting that we will see exponential delivery on the strategy and not just the approval element. The other one that I would like to just comment on as an example is that we were talking about the PSP program. And again, in the absence of Dr. Shaw, one can comment that it's one of the initiatives or the strategic intents that we are closing out or have closed out. And focusing on delivery for the year 2022. So, Chairperson, to the point of the long list, I would confirm that the process is going forward, and the EXCO that is looking at improving the performance of Transnet has taken a significant list of the items that are in the corporate, in the shareholder compact, as we have in the financials we are reporting, and has been incorporated in each of the CEOs as it relates to different parts of the business. And I think Caesar would have touched on specifically the TFR elements. So bearing the issue of subdued economic conditions from the internal elements and the activity, I think that a number of these items are incorporated into the corporate plan that we are we have just recently gotten submitted at the end of February, and we will see much implementation in the financial year we are going into. Thank you, Chair.
All right, Honorable Swartz, I'm going to request you to hold it there momentarily. And we'll go to men, we'll come back to it. We will work on another date with Transnet, to the board and the executives, and see which other date would be available. But I do want us to also get a touch of the issues of investigations. So can I come to colleagues now, and we'll take it to 12, and then Honorable List will then come in on investigations. But I see here on my sequence of hands, Honorable List is the first one. So follow-ups. So Honorable Swartz, just be on standby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to everyone. Yeah, I must say that as a user of the N3 and faced with hundreds of thousands of trucks on that road as I use it on a regular basis, I think the figure of 45,000 truckloads taken off the road nationally really is a very small figure. And what it leads me to is that despite the slow economic progress being made by the economy, the opportunities for Transnet are massive. And so I don't think it is right to say that the performance is flatlining because of the slow economy. I think the opportunities are there, and I do hope that we're going to see some real action and not just more plans to improve that kind of performance of Transnet. But let's get back to the annual report. On page 8, the external auditor says they checked the going concern assumption made by the board, but they do not state that I can see, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that they actually accept it. The board goes at great length to talk about the going concern status, and when I'm talking about the board, I'm talking about this board. The annual report was signed off by Popo, by Portia, and Non-Koleko. So it is you who have assumed a going concern status for the company, and yet the auditor doesn't confirm that assumption, simply says he's checked it or she's checked it. Why is that? Do you have any insight into that? Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure whether we're in hearing now or whether I should just put a few questions and then get answers.
No, let's get answers. How many questions do you have?
I have 4, but they're really quite brief.
Okay, put all 4, and then if the responses, then you can just come back with a follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that's entirely in order. The question on page 22 this is of your annual report, the pensioners' class action and the merging of the funds, which is due to be effective from the 31st of March in a couple of weeks' time. Can we have some progress on that one, please? And then what I haven't been able to find in the report is a safety report. And forgive me if it's there, but I'm really battling with getting these electronic reports and not a hard copy. Mr. Chairman, I really do think we need to deal with that. So the safety report, I'm looking particularly for a comparison of derailments year on year. And then my last question, Mr. Chairman, on page 19, there's a note there about a loan to SA Express, which was 222 million rand, and at the end of the last financial year, it grown to 260 million with interest added. According to the note, this loan to SA Express was requested by the Minister of Public Enterprises. And interesting that Caesar Mzimela, who was CEO as SA Express crash landed, is on this call today. My question is, on what basis, other than a request from the Minister of Public Enterprises, was a loan made to SA Express? How can that possibly be part of the mandate of Transnet? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, may we get responses to those questions, and then we will proceed to the next section if there are no other follow-ups. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Okay, cool.
Oh, you go ahead, Pushin.
No, Nonkulego, I'm fine. I was asking you to answer the question. You and if with Louis, I think, on that first question, and then the other people will come in and answer. I've also asked Sandra to deal with the pension fund one.
Thank you, Chairperson. I will start on the comments on page 8 in the Independent Auditor's Report, Chairperson. And the Chair of Audit will also add if I leave out anything. But Chairperson, if I can just, on the structure of that page to the committee, indicate that the way that the auditors tabulate their report is that they would have looked at Transnet's submission to the auditors, and their ultimate goal is to say, are the statements of Transnet fairly presenting what would have happened in the financial year under review? So, Chairperson, if we look at page 8, what the auditors do is to say the board of Transnet has the responsibility to confirm that Transnet is a going concern, and through the modeling and the work they would have done, and doing a future outlook of what they think Transnet will look like into the 18 months. And therefore, the auditors, Chair, on the left-hand side, and you will see that it's a table that indicates that for the auditors, this was a key audit matter that they needed to review, but also because it has got some judgment elements in relation to what is likely to pan out in the future in the focus that we do. But what then the auditors do is that on the right-hand side, they articulate as auditors how they would have addressed the matter as they saw it as a key audit matter. And in the right-hand column, Chairperson, alongside the going concern assessment, they are indicating what they've done to satisfy themselves. And in the way that they would put their report, Chairperson, if they were concerned about what the assessment of the board was on going concern, they would put a note in their opinion, which is the actual opinion that they put through about Transnet's going concern. And on the basis that they didn't put a note that says we are concerned, it tells us, and much as they are not here, that they were comfortable with the work that the board had done to assess going concern and their own review of the board's work, but they leave it to be the board's work in this area of judgment as far as it relates to going concern. And I could also highlight that the second bullet there talks to another element that they saw, which they call allowance for expected credit losses, which they saw as an area of judgment, and they reviewed it. And on the right-hand side, Chairperson, they talk about how they satisfied themselves and not to make a comment on the going concern. But there is comfort from management and board that as we closed and signed the financials, Transnet continued to be a going concern. Chairperson, on the question of the hard copy file.
Nonco, can I just come in there from the audit committee perspective, honourable member, just to confirm that the audit committee recommends to the board approves, and the auditors as such then noted, check, and if they differ, they will comment. And that debate and discussion also was tabled at the audit committee where the recommendations was done, and the board minutes confirm the going concerns. So the auditors were in fact comfortable with that position. Otherwise, they would have raised it. I concur with the input from the CFO. Back to you, Nonko.
Thank you, Chairperson. Maybe I also just want to comment on the need for hard copies. I must also just add that normally we would deliver to the parliamentary committees hard copies of the financial statements. And Chairperson, at any moment we can make them available. However, I do think that in this financial year, with the COVID and an attempt to work with soft copies, we might have not delivered enough, but we will make the hard copies available as required by the committee. Chairperson, on the question that was asked around the safety, I think the question that says, where is it in the report? We've got the financial statements as one book, and then we've got another book that we call Integrated Report of 2020 as a separate book. And I think we would have sent soft copies in 2 different books. But if you look, Chairperson, on page 95 of the second book, which we call Integrated Report and not the annual financial statements, we do have details around safety performance of the organization on page 95 of our integrated report, and we can take any questions or comments, Chairperson, from what we've articulated in the report on page 95. The other question was around. I don't
have that book, I'm afraid.
You may proceed, ma'am. Honorable Liz, please mute.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So we can make the other copy available. The other question, Chairperson, was around the loan to SAA Express, and maybe I'll ask Advocate Kutia to also comment on that and what is being done at the current moment.
Chair, honorable members, can I just step in on that one? Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to give you too satisfactory an answer other than to say that loan was given in December 2017. It was an amount of 220 million that was approved by the then board of Transnet, not this board that we have. And this was at the request of Minister Brown. We can't give too much more detail than that on that issue. However, we can ask Sandra Kutsia to indicate in terms of the PFMA, was that in any shape or form out of the law? And then we can talk a bit about the merger of the pension funds and also the class action lawsuit that we had with regard to that. Thank you. Sandra, if you can please come in.
Thank you, Portia. Chairperson, let me speak to the South African Express loan matter first. The request was put by the Minister. However, it was supported by a resolution of the board to extend the loan. So in terms of the PFMA, it was supported by a board resolution. With regard to Transnet's claim, with regard to South African Express Airways, we have lodged our claim, but as a related party, we are not very optimistic as to what the net result of our claim would be. In other words, how much would we be able to recover? But our claim has been registered with the liquidators, and we continue to enforce that claim. If I may, just on the pension funds, whilst I have the floor, also give feedback that the merger of the pension funds towards the end of this month is on track. It's not behind schedule, and it will proceed accordingly. With regard to the class action, there are no outstanding items in this regard.
Sorry, Honourable Chair, we needed to answer the question of derailment. There were 84 in 1920, and to date, and year to date, we've had 68. Thank you, Chair.
All right, colleagues, are there any further questions?
Mr. Chairman, can I just clarify the
All right.
one issue, please? Thank you very much for the replies. Whilst I have a slightly different view about the auditor's role in accepting a going concern, I understand what you're saying. But in terms of the SA Express loan, if you've lodged a claim, does that mean that you have Transnet has some sort? In fact, you've just said that Transnet has no preferential status. Is there not a very good chance of Transnet having to make a contribution, given that the bankruptcy of SA Express is so complete?
If I may, Chair, there's no obligation to make a contribution. What is at risk is Transnet's claim against the loan extended to South African Express Airways. It is not a preferential claimant, but there's no obligation to contribute at all.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Chairperson, there's a small point that I need to make. Mr. Lis, in his comment, he makes reference to the fact that Sizam Zimela is sitting in this meeting. The implication of that statement is that she might have been responsible for procuring the loan. I think we should place on record, Chairperson, that she was not with South African Express when that loan was given, so she really had nothing to do with it. That's just the point I want to make on that issue.
No, that is fine. The South African Express matters in any case will still be dealt with by this committee. And as indicated last year, we will be scheduling hearings with the executives of those SOEs. So I think at that point, Umngoni will be in a position to answer for herself on any matters that will be related to her role at that entity. But the point is well taken as a point of clarity at this point. So I think there's no train smash in this regard. We will still be dealing with those matters at an appropriate time. So there do list on the many things. So Chairperson, that is fine. That clarity is noted. Right, Honourable Swart will take the last question in this section, and then Honourable Lis kick us off with investigations.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, my last question is, were there any performance bonuses paid during the year under review?
Honourable Chair and Honourable Member, can I ask Kayangema to answer that question? To my knowledge, none were paid, but and would have only related to the long-term incentive bonuses, which would have vested. And so when it vests, you have to pay it. It's a matter of a contractual requirement. But there were no short-term incentives that were paid, to my knowledge, for the last year's performance, because as you indicated, Honourable Member, performance was not met. Thank you. Kaya, please, if you can just confirm.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, if you can hear me. So the performance bonuses were not paid, so the STI threshold were not met because of the performance over the period, for the reasons that I think were stated in the presentation. However, it wasn't because the incentive system was suspended. So in the bargaining unit, in the operating divisions, those who did meet their performance targets, they did get paid their productivity incentives. So there's a scheme of productivity incentives. So there were some months or quarters where there are some container terminals, because they continued to push essential cargo and whatever, did meet the thresholds, and they managed to meet them. But in general, I think none of the divisions could meet the performance incentives, and so they were not paid. Thank you, Chair. Other than the long-term incentives that aggregate over the three-year terms, as the Group Chief Executive has indicated. Thanks.
All right, no, that's fine. Honorable Swartz, thank you very much. You will come back at the end, Goba. This is your focus area. If there's any other issues. Honorable Liz, your investigations take us to 1 o'clock now.
Ngiyabonga kakhulu. I'm not sure that ngizoyidinga sonke leso sikhathi. But nevertheless, the investigations are vast and are indicative of an organization that certainly has gone through a period of considerable malfeasance and mismanagement. But that's not to say that the current situation mirrors what these investigations are revealing. And having listened carefully for the last hour, 2 hours, I certainly hope and pray that that situation has changed dramatically given the reassurances that have been given to us. Nevertheless, the investigations are ongoing, and you now have to play a role in resolving these investigations. So the questions therefore have to be answered by yourselves. Let me kick off with something that we've talked about at some length this morning already, and that's the conflicts of interest investigation by the SIU. So we've talked a lot about the process that's in place, lifestyle audits and so on, strengthening of controls, processes. I must say, I do get a little bit uncomfortable, Mr. Chairman, when the solution is training, which is absolutely essential for new employees, but shouldn't really apply to existing employees who have been in situations of conflict. And so hopefully they will be dealt with fairly robustly. So the SIU has prioritized high-level officials and has made recommendations to Transnet. Who are these high-level officials?
Honorable Chair and honorable members, can I request Sandra Kutsia to answer some of the questions, and then there's Eric Neethling, who's running with the investigations, to indicate the answers to the question.
Thank you, Chairperson. If I may respond with a generic introduction and leave the detail to Eric on the investigation side. Just in broad terms, what we are doing right now as Transnet with regard to our responsiveness to the SIU investigations is we have intensified our engagements with the SIU to be able to plan with the SIU an immediate response to their recommendations. We've conducted an audit of all the recommendations made by the SIU, and we are progressively moving through all of those recommendations. For most part, it has been completed. Those recommendations refer to disciplinary actions that had been taken. Our report reflects the disciplinary actions taken with regard to Mr. Msakhala in collaboration with the SIU. You will note that we secured the forfeiture of assets, Mr. Msakhala's assets. That is under appeal at the moment. We have also, with regard to the investigations on the NNPP, taken the necessary actions, as well as on the TPL side, 3 individuals were disciplined. We are conducting and have in fact almost completed all of the policy reviews that the SIU has recommended to Transnet. You will note that with regard to the matters that are under investigation, with the exception of 3, the SIU investigations have progressed to a stage where we are now engaging the SIU with their counsel to determine the next action steps in terms of the recovery of losses and further disciplinary action to be instituted. With regard to the conflict of interest matters, we have in particular reviewed our policies in that regard. The lifestyle audit referred to earlier covered all of the senior officials as well as board members. So the latest position with regard to the category A to C staff members and the board members have been attended to. With regard to the category A to C staff members, we are currently pursuing around 12 matters through disciplinary processes. That is the result of an extensive and objective independent assessment and deep dive into all of the conflict of interest matters related to those categories of employees. Eric, if I can hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair, honourable members, Sandra. So on the investigative side, one of the primary features that have been undertaken was to, from an internal perspective, move the investigators from a regional scenario into a central space so that they can operate across all the ODs. In that way, a relevant skill set can be developed accordingly. From a policies perspective, the anti-fraud and corruption policy is also currently being reviewed so that it also conforms to the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. Regarding lifestyle audits, I just also want to mention there's always a lot of focus around it, and that it is kind of seen as the holy grail, but it needs to be run in conjunction with other activities. It is but a source of information pertaining to whether individuals' lifestyles commensurate with their income. So that's from a broad-based perspective. In terms of how we look at investigations, we look at investigations from a sensitive perspective. That would be individuals that are operating at grade level A to C, and then from levels D onwards would be regarded as less sensitive, where the grading is basically considered the determining factor. But it can happen that there might be significant cases that develop in those kind of in your lower grade levels. So just from a basic background perspective, from the 3,844 cases that we've reviewed, and this is going back many years into Transnet, 178 cases related to sensitive matters. So that would be individuals within the grade A to C environment. But the far biggest part of the bulk of the allegations that we receive from either the public or internally relates to scams, and that would be criminal syndicates who from the outside misuse Transnet names to, for instance, facilitate employment scams. So that is definitely a matter that we need to look at in terms of also how we engage with the public, etc. Regarding the sensitive cases, as reported by the SIU, I mentioned earlier that we have fine established relationships with them. Each case is taken on a case-specific basis. The items as per the slides related to matters that are going to be taken on, those matters are still within the investigative space within the SIU, and I wouldn't be in a position to at this time give too much detail on it other than what is within the slides. regarding the names, asked who these individuals were. I think advocates could see mentioned those as well. Thank you.
Is Sandra going to tell us who the name? She's mentioned one name, and that's Mr. Msagale, who was involved in the NMPP project. Are there other names?
Chairperson, yes, there are other names. As we've indicated, those are under investigation and due process. As soon as that process has been completed, we will be able to provide the results of that, but they're still under investigation and due process.
Thank you. Yeah, that kind of leads us to the point that my colleague made earlier about the pace at which these things are taking place, and I would really urge some haste in resolving these matters. But that as it is, let's move on to the NMPP project, the multi-products pipeline project. We've now got the senior official involved in this investigation by the SIU. Who was the service provider who was involved?
Honourable members, Chair, Sandra and Michelle, is it possible for you to come and provide some answers to those questions?
Yes, Chair, let me switch on my video. It's Michelle Phillips here from Transnet Pipelines. So the first matter, as per the slides, the service provider in that matter is IGS Consulting. That's the matter relating to Mr. Msagala. The second matter that we have is a matter where there was an attempt to at theft of petroleum. Unfortunately, the attempt was, we were able to stop the theft, so no loss took place. However, as per the SIU's recommendation, we have reported the matter to the DPCI. The companies involved, there were in fact 3 companies involved. The one that is listed is the company, I suppose, that was at the root of the offence, New Horizon Energy. And then there are 2 more companies that were also involved, Gas to Liquids and Antaryami Logistics. So those matters we have now referred to the Hawks for further investigation as per our obligation in terms of Section 34 of the Act. And once we have the matter investigated, the necessary action will then be taken against the companies involved. The 3 employees were dismissed. The former chief executive